Dear ladies and gentlemen, пані та панове, last 10 days since Monday morning, October 10, the most massive shelling of Ukraine since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion taking place. Russians hit power-generating facilities and non-strategic targets such as parks, museums, libraries, and tourist sites. Russia is massively bombarding Ukrainian cities using various missiles in order to destroy civilian infrastructure and provoke panic. Some days it's nearly 100 missiles a day. Just want to remind you that the cost of one missile is basically the same as the one to build a school or nursery. The time chosen to the attack, the rush hour, when people get to work and take their children to schools and kindergarten, contributes to a higher number of civilian casualties. Critical infrastructure facilities in most of the cities were attacked, and as a result, many cities, including Kyiv and Lviv, were left without electricity, heating, and water. And I just want to give you this general context to understand what is really going on. Я гадаю, що українським нашим слухачам навіть не потрібно цього нагадувати, але впродовж останніх 10 днів, від ранку понеділка 10 жовтня, відбувається наймасштабніший обстріл України з початку повномасштабного вторгнення Росії. Росіяни б'ють здебільшого по енергетичних об'єктах і нестратегічних, а це парки, музеї, бібліотеки та туристичні об'єкти. Росія масово бомбардує українські міста, використовуючи БПЛА та різні ракети, щоб зруйнувати цивільну інфраструктуру і спровокувати паніку. І інколи це майже 100 ракет на день. Нагадую, що вартість запуску однієї ракети часами приблизно така ж, як у будівництво школи чи дитячого садка. Вибраний для атаки час – це здебільшого година пік, коли люди збираються на роботу і ведуть дітей до шкіл і садків, сприяє більшій кількості жертв серед мирного населення. У більшості міст були атаковані об'єкти критичної інфраструктури, внаслідок чого більшість, зокрема також Київ і Львів, залишилися без світла, опалення та води. So please bear with us if any technical inconvenience will take place. We are starting episode number 34 of our series of conversation and interviews with intellectuals in Ukraine and abroad. For those out there who are keen to learn more, think deeper, and hear from the original sources. Тож заздалегідь, перепрошуємо, якщо виникнуть будь-які технічні незручності. Ми розпочинаємо епізод 34 нашої серії розмов та інтерв'ю з інтелектуалами в Україні та за кордоном. Для тих, хто хоче дізнатися більше, думати глибше, чути з першого джерела. This is a project of PEN Ukraine, whose team is continuing their work under extremely difficult conditions, and we can't take it for granted their dedication and commitment. Це проєкт українського PEN-клубу, команда якого продовжує свою роботу в надзвичайно складних умовах. І ми не можемо сприймати це просто як належне. The project is co-hosted by PEN International, which has continued to provide a platform for freedom of expression for those currently under the highest risk. The project is implemented with the support of the US Embassy in Ukraine and our traditional partners, who are PEN America, the Ukrainian Institute London, Ukraine World, Local History, Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, the Harman Institute at Columbia University. We will broadcast today's event to all partners' Facebook pages. Співорганізатором проєкту є Міжнародний ПЕН, який продовжує надавати платформу для свободи вираження поглядів тим, хто перебуває у групі найвищого ризику. Нагадаю, що проєкт втілюється за підтримки Посольства США в Україні. І нашими традиційними партнерами є ПЕН Америка, Український інститут Лондона, Україна Світ, Локальна історія, Український науково-дослідний інститут Гарвардського університету та Інститут Гаррімана при Колумбійському університеті. Ми транслюємо сьогоднішню подію на всі партнерські сторінки у Facebook. The event will be held in English. My name is Olha Mukha, and I'm delighted to introduce our today's guests. Tetyana Ogarkova, Ukrainian literary scholar, journalist, and essayist. She has contributed to different news outlets and is currently in charge of international outreach at the NGO Ukraine Crisis Media Center and co-host of the podcast Explaining Ukraine, which is made in partnership with Ukraine World and Interviews Ukraine. Recently, in an interview, you commented on the concept of impunity and its presence in Russian culture and literature. You specifically mentioned Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. This is probably the most popular book everybody's referring to when we're talking about Russian literature. and how the lack of actual judgment and punishment in the book can shed a light on a society that seems to value power over justice, and therefore provides a backdrop on the crime of aggression Russia is currently committing in its war against Ukraine. You recently also wrote The Guardian that literature can also help to understand the meaning of one's resistance in times of war and to understand what there is to fight for. It will be very interesting to hear more about your perspective on those concepts today. And Tetyana will be holding the dialogue with our other guest, Sylvie Kauffmann. Thank you for joining us today. Sylvie is a French journalist and editorial director of Le Monde. She specializes in foreign affairs and has a weekly column in Le Monde, as well as contributing to the New York Times and Financial Times. She was notably the first female editor-in-chief of Le Monde and its Moscow correspondent during the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Currently on sabbatical in Berlin as a fellow of the Robert Bosch Foundation. And in the context of Ukraine, in your most recent column for Le Monde, the one I found and read, you commented on the punishment that awaits Russia under international law and the demand for repatriation by those affected, reparation of those affected, and also specifically due to the lack of responsibility that was exhibited during the Soviet era. But you mentioned that difficult questions of collective punishment that hangs about the war, and to what extent this may be Putin's war or Russia's collective crime. And it will be interesting to hear more on both your perspectives during those dialogues, possibly also on this concept of accountability you have both commented on previously. I'm handing over the floor to you, dear Sylvie, and will disappear for about 40 minutes. Enjoy your conversation, and I'm about to take notes. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Olha, and thank you, Tetyana. It's great to meet you and be with you, although online, but it's better than nothing. And I'm very happy to be able to have this conversation with you. I'm told that you are in Kiev, and I would like to ask you what is the situation in Kiev? Where are you sitting? What is life like today in Kiev? Because those attacks have resumed now. I was there about a month ago, and I was surprised at how peaceful, normal, I would say, the city looked like. I say looked like because it was probably not so serene, but since then the bombings and the attacks have resumed, and so I guess the mood must be different and the way people live their everyday life must be different. So first, can you tell me, how is your life today?
Thank you for your question, Sylvie. It's an honor to be with you on one panel in this dialogue, and thank you very much for PEN Ukraine and all other prominent people organizing that for us. So I am actually in the office of Ukraine Crisis Media Center, which is situated in Ukrainian house on the European Square, so Krещатик Street. So this is the extreme center of the city, and quite a few meters from the place, a Russian missile arrived on the 10th of October. It's close to this bridge made of glass, of what we call here in Ukraine, Klitschko Bridge. You've seen maybe all of us in this image, this video showing this missile arriving to this bridge. Luckily enough, the bridge is still here, but the place really doesn't seem to be damaged a lot. But I would say that, yes, indeed, starting from the 10th of October, our life has changed a bit, because for many months we had an impression that, yes, indeed, there is a war. This is serious, but this is going in the east and the south. We had quite a big number of air alerts, but it was kind of distancing for us, and I would not say that we were ignoring it, because it would be not intelligent to ignore, but it was kind of part of our routine. But on the 10th of October, we were on our way back from Lviv to Kiev, And I will never forget that moment when you arrive to a railway station and you get multiple messages coming from your family, and specifically in my case from our kids, from my our eldest daughter, who says, "Mom, we are all right, but the explosion was so loud that my impression was that it was somewhere in close to our house." And I asked, what is going on? So it's like, and then all the news coming with all these images, and then there were information about the railway station was also damaged. Personally, I haven't witnessed that. Maybe it was before, after, because they are kind of electric installations close to the railway station. So it changed things, because we don't feel so secure inside Kiev as we used to a couple of weeks or months ago. And it looks like a different situation. The schools are closed. They are offline starting from the 10th of October, the kindergartens as well. And there were quite a big number of blackouts already inside Kiev and all around the country. So it means that you are doing things and then suddenly you have no more electricity. And it means that you have to change your ordinary things. And what we read in the media, what we know from the media, is that this is happening in many cities, in towns all across Ukraine. So it means that nobody is really in secure situation, and it is becoming a part of our routine. Just we wake up. Oh, there were no air alerts, that's good. But then, so we are today, for example, air alert started at 10. Approximately 10 in the morning, and you are in the kind of a not real stress, because we have it to do so, but this is the kind of, you really pay attention to what's going on. But the reaction, and maybe I'll finish here, I would highlight one important thing, because if we compare what is happening now in October with what was happening late February, at that moment of great panic, missiles arriving to Kiev, to many other cities, and a lot of disorder, a lot of feelings, a lot of despair for many people. There were families with kids who were leaving the capital. And I feel that there is a difference with what's happening now, because people are inside this situation. But I would not say that we are afraid. This is something different. We need to find a word for what we feel, but it's like, I would describe it like anger, but not only anger, but just the understanding that we are here and that we don't have right to panic. So this is our way to resist, and we do understand that there will be, we'll have a big number of problems, specifically with electricity supply, because it changes everything when it's cold outside and when it's already dark at 6 or 5, 6 in the evening. So it will change our life, and we have to live through this extremely difficult winter and to stand.
Yeah, I must say I was really struck when I went very briefly to Kiev 5 weeks ago, just for 48 hours. But what struck me was, in my conversations with the people I met there, was that they were calm, poised, very controlled. If there is anger, it is I had the impression that it was controlled, and very strong determination I felt from the people I talked to, and I was really impressed, I have to say. I know a little bit the Ukrainian mindset, but in this kind of situation, I thought that was quite striking. And talking about the situation you described about, winter coming and no electricity, no heating, sometimes no gas. I understand you have also been to Kharkiv recently, and there I just yesterday I read a report in my newspaper from one of our reporters there, Emmanuel Greenspan, who was describing the situation in Kharkiv, and it seems to be really difficult, right? So tell me a little bit about what you have seen there, what you were doing in Kharkiv.
Yes, indeed, we made this trip to Kharkiv. It was already our third trip to Kharkiv. We went to the city in June and then in August, and then we planned to go directly after the liberation, this Ukrainian counter-offensive back in September, but unfortunately we got COVID, so we were unable to go there. In September, we went a couple of weeks later. So our aim, our objective was to see how the life is on the occupied territories. I mean, not only in Kharkiv itself, but also in these regions, in these places which were living under Russian occupation for many months, almost 6 months, and then to compare what is going now. Our aim was also to deliver an aid, a car, in fact, to our Ukrainian armed forces, what we started to do with funds collected through our podcast, Explaining Ukraine First, but also our Cult podcast with Volodymyr Yermolenko. It's on culture. It talks about writers, about ideas, about all these kind of things, and we collect money, and then we use that money to help our military. Why cars? Because cars, they save lives in the front line. An ordinary car lives for a couple of weeks on the front line, and soldiers, I mean, Ukrainian soldiers, are in high need of these cars to move, to transport things, to save their lives in case of shelling, whatever. So this was our aim. So Kharkiv today looks much better, if I can say so, better, if you compare to what was going there in August, for example. In August, there were extremely tough shellings. For example, we spent there in August 3 nights, and each night there were a huge detonations. Like you wake up and you just go to somewhere to the bathroom or between two walls because you are really scared. There are huge detonations. Today, after the liberation, everybody can witness that, yes, indeed, they have some missiles arriving during night, but this is looks much more like an exception than a rule. So sometimes it happens, but it's not happening every night. So that's the difference. And what we've also seen in Kharkiv, this is they have more cars today, because before it was like you arrive to Kyiv and you just like you have an impression that you arrive to a different planet, because you have traffic jams here, you have people drinking coffee in the streets, you have all these people walking in the street. Is different. Kharkiv, it was quite a quiet and I would not say empty, but not a lot of people. And today they have more cars, but the life is really difficult because people are talking about the absence of heating. Maybe they will have some heating around 14 degrees or maybe 16 degrees inside, if Russians will not hit the last stations they have. So you never know how it happens. But we were impressed once again with Kharkiv. Kharkiv is an incredible city. People are extremely strong, and people of these artistic networks we were able to meet. I mean Jardin, milieu, as they say, but also literary museum of literature in Kharkiv. All these artists, writers, street art artists, which are extremely active. They stayed in the city from the very beginning. They were organizing humanitarian aid for civilians, but later they organized military aid to Ukrainian troops. And all of these, imagine you have a writer, and then a painter, and then another cultural activist, and in the courtyard of the church of Saint Dmitry Church in Kharkiv, and there are military cars which arrive every 30 minutes, and they are taking off all this aid delivered by artists. So this kind of thing, that military and church and then artistic circles are together to do things, you have a very strange impression, a very strong impression. And that time when we've been in Kharkiv, there were already cultural events, what they call the 5th Kharkiv Festival, organized in the downtown Kharkiv, in the underground club, let us call it like that. And the even we arrive, we see Jardin, famous Ukrainian poet, writer, and Svetoslav Vakarchuk, famous Ukrainian singer, who are having a kind of discussion in the underground about Ukraine, about its future, about what's going on. So, and a crowd of people, I would say several, maybe hundreds, I don't know exactly, several hundreds of people present, and they are so eager to participate in all this. And a lot of people in military uniforms, so it means they may be territorial defense or whatever, soldiers. So it creates a kind of really strong image of what Kharkiv is, and we do appreciate people and we love people who are spend there all the time. And Kharkiv, I would say, it's a very important city for Ukraine.
So the morale is holding well, yeah.
Yeah, indeed. But this is Kharkiv. But if you look further, and we travel to occupied territories, the occupied territories, we've been to Izium. I think that probably everybody knows what Izium is now. It is a city, a small town liberated back in September, and the place of mass graves. And we visited the site 3 weeks after the exhumation process were already over. It's extremely hard to be there because you see all these graves, you see all this sorrow, you feel all these things. But this is also important to be there. We try to understand what really happened. We talked to people who were responsible to bury these people, how come they were crosses, for example, wooden crosses, and just numbers and not names. So we spent quite a lot of hours to understand how it was going. And just it proves once again the extreme cruelty of what Russians were doing to civilians in the region, and a lot of sorrow and a lot of disasters in this region, because they will not be having electricity in coming months. They will not be having heating, so there will be no civilizations. And unfortunately, people, they do come to liberated territories. They check their houses. Sometimes they do some repair work like windows or whatever, but then they leave to spend this winter at least somewhere in a safer place, because there will be no heating. So imagine you just check your house, check your place, and then you're obliged to go back because there is no possibility. I'm not talking about schools. There will be no schools, no kindergartens.
And they leave and they go where? Where do they go?
Elsewhere, when they found some way in the western region. Some live maybe even in Kharkiv region, but on the other side of Kharkiv, so in places which were not occupied, so they do have electricity. And so it creates like this impression of a ghost city in a way, you know, and ghost villages. Just one more story, and I'll stop about this. I can talk for hours about that. It was so important for us to see, to feel these things. We've been to a village called Bezruki. Bezruki, it's a small village, really tiny village close to Russia, 15 kilometers from Russia. It was never occupied by Russian army, but it was a place of shellings back in March and April. And then it was quite calm in summer. And then we met a family, because which lost their girl of 8 years old, who was just in her garden, and she was reading a book. And it was extremely calm day without any shelling, nothing happened. But then there was a bomb which arrived, and it killed her together with her aunt, and 38 years old. And we met this grandmother who lost both her daughter and her granddaughter at the same 1 second without any shelling, because normally these people were in the underground. But that day was extremely high, sunny, good summer day, 21st of June. And this house, you know, so this grandmother, she's living in a different house, and this house is now empty, and you are just able to see things of this little girl, of this family. Everybody left because there's no more possibility to live inside, even if the damage to the house itself is minor. So it's quite easy to repair, but you have some problems to live in a place where such a tragedy happened. So this is what's happening to these deoccupied territories. There are a lot of pain. And I think that all these people, they need time to get back, because it's a huge trauma. when your place, your house, I don't know, your world is destroyed, and then you need time to, I hope they will come back, but later, not now. They will need time, security, conditions, electricity, and they will need time to heal their wounds.
Yeah, to heal. And that leads us to this issue that Olya alluded to earlier of crime and punishment. Yeah. And yes, I did write about this because I was struck by the differences in opinion or in feelings probably between us in Western Europe and you who are in the country, who are living in the country which is being attacked and who witness all these atrocities that you have talked about. And of course, Izium now is like Bucha, you know, it's a symbol of these those war crimes, right? And so there is in our part of Europe, I think this, not among everybody, not in everybody, but I think it's a feeling that yes, there are war crimes, and people have, you know, leaders have to be held accountable for those, but then in the end, we all have to live together after the war is over. And you know, I remember a German diplomat who talked about Germany after the war and said, you know, eventually the other countries invited us back and they are now our allies, and there was reconciliation and so on. And of course, reconciliation, I guess, is a word at the moment in today's Ukraine, which is not audible, right? And so I would like to ask you also, how do you feel about this issue of collective responsibility? Because this issue was, of course, raised when there was this discussion about the visa ban for Russian citizens in the EU, whether they should, you know, so some countries thought there should be a ban to all Russian citizens, whoever they are, and whatever they think. And other countries thought, you know, they are not responsible for what their leaders do. And maybe it would be more useful if we could open the doors and try to explain to them or convince them that what's going on in their country is really wrong, yeah, and what their leadership is doing is really wrong. So I see that, including from a moral point of view, it's a difficult issue. I don't know whether at the moment in Ukraine, this is an issue you can really discuss, or this horror of the war crimes is so traumatizing that it's not even possible to talk about it or to think about the future.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot for this question. I've read your text about that, and we all know the subtle. I mean, this question is really complicated, and a lot of things depend on from which place you are talking. So when you are an European, you think about what happened in Europe after the First World War, specifically with Germany, and in which way this defeat and this humiliation which Germany experienced, in which way it led to much more horrors of the Second World War. So when, for example, we see Germans or French a lot, and for example, you also maybe remember this Emmanuel Macron statements about don't humiliate Russia and all that things. It was said in the context of the European perspective, when he was referring to this past between France and Germany, and then they were standing together here in Kiev in June, Olaf Scholz, Chancellor, and Emmanuel Macron, President of the French Republic, and they are allies now. So they're together. So this is in the past. So this is this European perspective. And I would say that there are not a lot of Ukrainians which can freely discuss about that and take into consideration calmly and without emotions all this discussion. And this is natural because first of all, this is not their story. And some of them, they don't really remember this story. And secondly, because people are a lot in this traumatism, in the trauma. They are living their own experience and they have some problems accepting the idea to don't humiliate Russia. I mean, Russia, which represents for us Ukrainians, aggressors, people who commit crimes every day against our people. And this is not abstract, this is very concrete for us. It's very personal because everybody, I think everybody of Ukrainians have already lost somebody, be it a friend, a relative, or even not somebody, then it means something, a house or normal life, all this kind of stuff. So this question of collective responsibility and what to do, so the question of what if there are good Russians or not good Russians and what to do with visa, yes, indeed, this is a huge question. And I would say that here in Ukraine, we have quite a different perspective, and which is much more immediate than about long-term consequences. Well, what we know, so what irritates Ukrainians when we hear such expression like Putin's war or just Kremlin's war, this is something like as if they were only Putin committing crimes, but not the Russian people. What we see, unfortunately, is that Russian people, they do participate in this war, in the army. Millions are silent. They were trying to protest in the beginning. We've observed these manifestations back in February, and then a couple of events after this so-called partial mobilization, but no more than that. We do understand that Russian society is a different society. There's a lot of oppression, a lot of pressure, a lot of fear, but at the same time, we also know that almost 1 million Russians have already left the country. They're in Georgia, in Turkey, in Finland, in some other countries. But the problem, but the problem is that we don't see any kind of manifestations against the war these people organize. So they were against mobilization, but they are not really against this war. So it leads us to an idea. I do know that not a lot of people trust what they call sociological polls in Russia, conducted by Levada Center or any other kind of center, because this is difficult to have any kind of relevant figures when the country is in this stage of war. But we know that the majority of people they support this war or are indifferent to this war. So our attitude is not to tolerate that anymore, because we understand that a lot of Russians are waiting for the moment the Putin's regime will be over. They are waiting for the end. But the problem for us Ukrainians is that we are paying their silence and their non-action with our blood, with our losses every day, with our absence of civilization, of comfort. So we are struggling we are having this battle in their place. And all Ukrainians think that there is a role for Russian people, for civil society, any kind of action would be useful. So that's why we are calling, sometimes we call useful Russians. So what they call good Russians, it means useful Russians, Russians which are trying to do something to change the situation. But unfortunately, we don't see a big number of such people. They are not visible. And we understand that nobody wants to risk their life going on to manifestations, but this is that irritates a lot Ukrainians, because they refuse to participate in this war. Just a last example. I remember I had a friend in Russia, a really good friend. We've been friends for 20 years. We were students together in France. So, you know, this friendship which formed during students' years is something which lasts for many years. And I remember he wrote me on the 24th of February, oh, how are you doing? He's not living in Russia no more. He was in Riga. And he wrote me, how are you doing? How can I help you? Something like that. So I explained that, so there is no way to help. We are doing what we can, etc., etc. And then I was observing he was not a single line on his social networks, on his, I don't know, any kind of channels about the condemnation of this, what's going on. So and then there was a post from him stating that all of you ask me what I think about this war. My point of view is simple. This is not my war. I am not participating in that. But when some people tend to make me name this war as a war of the good against evil, I would say that this is not the case. Look, like everything is not like that. And at that moment, I was really angry, because it looked like he was trying to say that there is no good and evil, and then look, Ukraine was maybe behaved badly or whatever. So I wrote him saying, what do you mean? And he said, let the time pass, we'll see how it goes. And I told him one thing before deleting him from my life forever. I would, look, you have a daughter, she'll grow up, and one day she'll ask you, what were you doing when Russians were bombing Mariupol's maternity hospital? She will not ask you what Putin was doing at that moment, because everybody will know what Putin did on his army. But your kids, your daughter, will ask you, and you, what was your action at that very moment? And you will be unable to respond. So this is a story how they present themselves as being unable to act, but this irritates a lot Ukraine.
Yeah, no, this is a very good point, and how this passivity, in fact, is close to complicity. Yeah, and you're right.
And what is your opinion? What is your? I also wonder.
Well, for me, it was difficult thinking about this, because, of course, when you're far away, as you said, it's not as traumatizing. I mean, I read all the time. I read a lot about what's going on, about this war, about what's going on in Russia. And my newspaper has I think, a very good coverage of this war. And it's, there's no, everybody was afraid of Ukraine fatigue in Europe, in Western Europe, after a couple of months, but I don't see this Ukraine fatigue at all. I think people are still very attentive to what's going on, and our coverage, for instance, still attracts a lot of readers and a lot of attention. So I see the public opinion still very engaged about this, which is really good, I think. And politicians talk about it and so on. But you're right. I mean, I thought the mobilization would provoke some kind of reaction, and it has a little bit, but the reaction is mostly fleeing, right? It's a negative reaction. It's not a reaction of fighting. And I understand the fear factor. I understand that the repression in Russia is really very bad. So I'm not saying, I'm not blaming anybody, but I agree with you. The fact that, maybe those 100,000 of Russians have left their country, and we don't hear from them. Yeah, we don't hear, they could be active, yes. And they are not, or they could be trying to organize some networks, resisting abroad, and we don't see this. So this is something which is, I think, very important, and that we have to analyze also on our part. I think I'm very struck by this argument that yes, Germany was tried after the war, and the Nazi leaders were tried and condemned. And this hasn't happened about Soviet crimes. And this is very true. This is very true. And I think we will have to find a way you know, a civilized way, because this is also a civilizational issue. And we, as Václav Havel used to say, we are not like them. We are different, so we have to do it in our humanistic and democratic way. But we have to find a way to deal with the Soviet legacy and the communist legacy, which, and you know, this was a totalitarian regime, and we thought after the end of the Cold War that it was over, and that was a big mistake. I think that was a big collective mistake. We assumed that this was all over and that now, you know, we were all going to become kind of part of the free world and adjust to these new circumstances, and we obviously didn't. So and Ukraine is a big factor in revealing this reality to the Western world, I think. Maybe if there hadn't been this war, maybe we wouldn't be so aware of this now. So this is one of the lessons of this terrible war. I agree. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Maybe I would also like to ask you a question about France in particular, but maybe in more generally about Europe, because we do feel here from inside that things are changing for Ukraine. I mean, in this vision, in this image of Ukraine is having abroad, because we understand there is a lot of attention from foreign media, from foreign intellectuals, from people, even from people who are so with us at that very moment. What would be your vision of this development? And do you think that Europe, I mean, European Union as a formal institution would, which granted already this status of candidate for Ukraine, will continue this path? And would you think that, do you think that French, whatever, Germans or Italians maybe are feeling Ukrainians as being Europeans today more than they felt, let us say, 1 year ago, 2 years ago?
Yeah, no, definitely. There's a big change in the way we look at Ukrainians today. I must say, in France, this is different. In Poland, of course, probably also in Germany. In France, there was not such a big Ukrainian community, and so I'm not sure the French people knew a lot about Ukraine or about Ukrainians. Now they know much more. They are more interested. Not that we have a lot of refugees. No, I think we are probably one of the Western countries with fewer refugees for some reason. But of course, there is a lot of admiration and a lot of positive feelings about Ukrainians. Now, and I have to say also about Ukrainian women, and Ukrainian military soldiers, and you know, the French are interested in military affairs. Yeah, and unlike the Germans, this is something of interest for the French people in general, and so there's quite. I think the French are impressed by this, by the way the Ukrainians are waging this war. Apart from that, on the European Union issue, I think that it's considered as very logical that the candidate status was given to Ukraine. When Macron and Scholz and Draghi and the Romanian president, because we always forget about him, but I think it's very important that there was also a leader from Central Europe, President Iohannis, to go with those three Western leaders. People felt it was very normal that this candidate status would be given. Now, what will happen when the war is over and that we go seriously into these proceedings, you know, which is a very complicated procedure and process. I think we will have to find another way to accelerate the access of Ukraine into the EU, and also to integrate it, because it will be, you know, even when the war is over, there will be so much to do, so much reconstruction. I mean, it will not be a country like when Spain accessed joined the European Union in the 70s, no, maybe in the 80s, I forgot which, but after the death of Franco, and, you know, and once it became a democracy, it was a different situation. Its economy was okay. It was a country out of dictatorship, but it was not a country out of war. So I think it's something which is still beyond our imagination. We think it's morally and politically right to open the EU to Ukraine, because it deserves it, and also because it will protect it. It will be a kind of protection, and it is part of, as they said, it's part of the European family, and we have to show it to the Russians this way, yeah? But concretely, the way we do it, we'll have to be careful. Again, we have to find new ways. We have to be creative. We have to be understanding also, and it will not be so easy. I think we have a big challenge in Western Europe this winter. You have your challenge of the winter without heating and electricity, and under shelling, and with all this threat and the war going on. We are less tough in Western Europe. Yeah, it's more difficult for people to endure this kind of conditions. It's going to be difficult, and I think it's really up to our leadership, politicians, also to the media, to intellectuals, to union leaders, you know, to the leaders of the civil society, also to make people understand that we also have to pay for this fight for freedom, and it will have a cost. And some leaders are already trying to save it, but I'm not sure everybody has, I'm actually sure that not everybody has understood it so far. We have already some social protests in France, of course, not against Ukraine at all, but against the prices, the prices of gas and everything going up. You know how restless can the French be. So there's really a lot of work to do, to explain and to convince people that, yes, we also have to make this effort, and that, you know, we are not living under the bombs, so it should be easier for us. But one thing which I find positive is that, for instance, the far right, which used to be very pro-Russian and pro-Putin, maybe is still pro-Russian and pro-Putin, but it's not saying it. You know, you cannot, this is something you cannot say in public now, on the radio, or, you know, in radio shows. You can't, the attitude of Russia and Putin cannot be defended anymore. So there's a positive change, I think, in the political opposition. I think this is for the better. Yeah.
Yes,
but I
and
know
all
there's
the
a lot of criticism still about Germany and France in Ukraine, right?
Yeah, I would not say skepticism, but yes, indeed, I think that there is a major changes which started from the February, because if we step back and see what was happening in 2014 with Crimea next, and when the part of the Donbass occupied, we remember the role of France and Germany as being a kind of mediators, right, between Russia and Ukraine, and these European countries were like mediators in this, around these Minsk agreements, these these agreements, which were never implemented by Ukraine, because they were written not in the interest of Ukraine, which was clear for Ukrainians from the very beginning. But let's remember the circumstances. They were concluded and signed at the moment when Russian troops were advancing severely in the Baltsev and all that kind of stuff. So it was they were forced to. And we remember we've read this book of François Hollande, the ex-president, and he was telling the story of how these Minsk agreements were written, and he described how Putin was crying, literally crying at Poroshenko, ex-president of Ukraine, and saying that je vais t'écraser,
I will crush you.
I'll destroy you. Yeah, right. So so the role of France and Germany was a mediator. Now what changed, what we feel, what we understand, is that now France and Germany, even if we regret, sometimes Ukrainians regret there were not huge amounts of military aid arriving from France and from Germany, mostly from Germany, but from France as well. So France is giving many things, but not a lot, not because maybe it doesn't want, but because it doesn't have all these necessary artillery systems in such amounts we need. So we need really big amounts. But the role of France and Germany is clearly, for Ukraine at least, is on the Ukrainian side. And in the role of mediator, we are having people like Erdogan, Turkey, people trying to negotiate with both Putin and then with Ukraine. So these negotiated, they are somewhere in the east, more in the east, not in the west. So yes, indeed, there is, but this solidarity with Ukraine is extremely, extremely important for Ukrainians, because what our ultimate argument when we are trying to explain why this is not only about Ukraine and Russia. This is not about that we don't want to give, I don't know, Kherson or Zaporizhia or any other kind of city, or Crimea to Russia. This is not about that. This is about this concept of impunity. I was talking in many places, in many occasions, and as our chief of command Zaluzhny was also talking about this impunity in his famous article he wrote about the nature of war. He was talking about military things, but this is Russian impunity, which is the center of this war. They thought they were able to take Crimea and nothing happens. They were able to take a part of Donbass and then nothing happens. Yeah, something was happening, right? There were sanctions, there were kind of isolation, but this is not what was a little bit artificial. Ukraine was weak enough at that moment to protest and to be real about that. We had no possibility, military possibility to get Crimea back. And this impunity, and each time you say, okay, let's concede, let's give the aggressor what he wants, and then we'll calm him down. So each time this policy is failing, because each time it nourishes his impunity idea. And what he's now doing with Kherson and Zaporizhia, annexing we don't even know what, because he's annexing like Zaporizhia region and Kherson, but they're not controlling. So this is like they're doing whatever they want. And if Europe says, okay, this is too difficult, this is too complicated for us, the prices are high, petrol and gas, and so let's maybe sacrifice this poor Ukraine to this Putin, because we want peace. We want that things were as they were before the war. This is a wrong way. And our ultimate argument is here, is that when you say that, okay, let's give the aggressor what he wants, it only makes him become the same impunity, in fact. So they believe in this impunity. They believe that there is no borders to Russian Federation. Yeah, no, literally now, because when now they think that they annexed something from Ukraine, nobody inside Russia is able to tell you exactly where this Russian Federation ends, right? So they don't know exactly. So this is the concept of empire, and this we should stop that, because this is not in name of Ukraine, but because it's named of our principles and values, and I mean European principles and values. There will be no place for an idea of impunity, right?
No, I think it's a major change. I agree with you. It's a major change in the mindset that, people we in the West, in Western Europe, not in the West because the Americans had the good intelligence, but in Western Europe, we of course didn't believe that Russia could invade Ukraine in such a scale, right? So that was a huge shock, and now the other shock was how they were able to do it. You know, those crime wars, there's those war crimes and those atrocities, and now what, you know, annexing more areas and declaring martial law. And so now there's including the idea that they may go further, they may attack NATO countries. You see, actually, at the moment, France is reinforcing what we call the eastern flank of NATO, so sending tanks and more forces into Romania, in the Baltic Republic. So yeah, this is a major political and intellectual change. I think this awareness that everybody's at risk now, and so we have to stand by you and help Ukraine to win the war. Yeah, for not only for themselves, but also for the rest of Europe, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
maybe, yeah, then maybe it's also important to say that, well, what Ukraine seeks now is the efficient actions and help. So we see that on the level of rhetorics, everybody agrees that that's all right. So this Putin regime is evil. And we ourselves are also trying to find the most efficient way to act in besides of Ukrainian army, which may be the most efficient here, because they already liberated a big amount of territories, but they are standing there resisting. We are trying to help them, but in a way, what we need is kind of a real support, be it in weapons. I'm not a military expert, but I can imagine that weapons are important because the numbers are important, and also in diplomatic things like what's happening in the Security Council of the United Nations. This is also unacceptable, right? So we are to find a way to kick off Russia from there, because this is not normal to be there. This is kind of so we try to find some efficient ways, and for everybody, every country to be efficient. This is not for only for us. This is also for everybody.
But, you know, you mentioned the UN Security Council, and this is a problem that I think your leadership, the Ukrainian leadership, is also aware of, because I see that your foreign minister Kuleba is reaching out to countries that you didn't deal too much with before, what we call the global south, yeah, because the countries from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, which didn't support Ukraine in the UN. So I think this is another effort that we have to make together, is diplomatically to reach out to these countries and people and say, look, you know, it's not only about us, it's also about you and the rest of the world. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And maybe the latest argument that's saying, we also have had this argument, so don't escalate, don't resist Putin, because it will lead to a bigger war, But the fact is that when we don't resist efficiently enough, this is becoming bigger, because Iran is already inside with these drones, and then Belarus, and I'm absolutely sure that Russia will find some other allies later if this will not be enough for them. So the conflict, when you make it last, it's becoming bigger, you know, in a way. So it's much better. We cannot imagine a situation when what we call collective West, or the Western countries, European Union, and together with United States, or together with Canada, will be unable to deal with Russia, which is big, but it's not so powerful as Russian troops have already demonstrated, and not so rich. I mean, from the economical point of view, it should be quite an easy task if really all united and all efficient against this aggression.
Yeah, we do have to stick together, I must say, because it is this what I'm afraid of, and I think it's a realistic assumption is that this is going to last for some time. So this will also be a challenge. You know, the length of this conflict is also going to be a challenge for all of us. Yeah, so we have to keep talking together at our level and working for this solidarity. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for finalizing with this statement of solidarity, first of all, and for this conversation, for sharing your personal experience, quite rich and sometimes very dangerous. I'm following you on Facebook and always fingers crossed, Tetyana, for your safety and for the success for everything you're doing together with your husband as well. And for such a deep cultural context and some optimistic forecast, dear Sylvie. That's also very important for us, for pointing out the significant changes which already happened in the context of political leaders' role, for example, and public opinion, for opening somehow the discussion on responsibility and accountability and changed optics, how Europe look at the Ukraine today. So thank you for this conversation. We started on anger, different civilization universe, right? Russian impunity as a core of this war, and touching the role of Ukrainian women too at the very end, looking for understanding, creating new ways, challenges of empathy and payment for freedom, which goes to everybody now, not Ukrainians only. And what makes me happy over the last few dialogues is switching the focus from what is happening and why to the discussion when the war is over, what's next. And the fact that this became the main topic to be discussed is very reassuring itself, I should say. And if you, our dear viewers, asking yourself, what can I do? Today I would say, as Tetyana asked her friend, ask yourself, what was I doing during those events? That would be a good start itself. And this is what our dialogues are about, honest questions and sometimes uncomfortable answers. This all would be not possible without the support of our partners, the US Embassy in Ukraine, PEN America, the Ukrainian Institute London, Ukraine World, Local History, Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, and the Harman Institute at Columbia University. The gratitude, of course, to PEN Ukraine, which continues to stand on the front lines in the name of freedom and truth. And PEN International is proud to be a platform that supports freedom of expression. We really hope that those dialogues give you enough insights and material for deep thinking. Thank you again, our dear speakers. That was great pleasure and privilege. And obviously our viewers, the next episode will be held on November 1st, same time, same place. And we will be hosting Natalia Humaniuk, Ukrainian journalist who specialized in foreign affairs and as well known as a co-founder and chair of the public television NGO Hromadska, and Sławomir Sierakowski, Polish journalist, literary critic, sociologist, and director of Institute for Advanced Study in Warsaw. So follow our dialogues on war, spread the word, and stand with Ukraine. This is our shared responsibility today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and keep safe, Tetyana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. It was an honor.
Okay.
Let's stay in touch.
That always the worst moment